As we remember the big bull of the Indian stock markets, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, I want to welcome in Global Business Editor Udayan Mukherjee, who has spent a considerable amount of time over the years in conversation with the big bull himself. Udayan, how do you remember Rakesh after all these years of knowing him? How do you feel he will be remembered in eternity?
Well, Aabha, I think he will be remembered for a man who created enormous wealth from the Indian stock market. But I don't think I will remember him like that because, of course, it is a big thing that he went on to become such a multi-billionaire starting from scratch, and no one can take that away from him. And that's why he's called the big bull. But, I remember him more fondly than that because the money part is, of course, fine. But I met him when I was in my late 20s for the first time. And in that first meeting, he made such an impression on me. And every time I met him, I came away with a smile on my face because he was always so witty and amusing and warm and full of life. And, there was such an irreverent streak to him. I mean, he was very foul-mouthed, as you know, and he would not spare anybody with any kind of the kind of adjectives that you would use to describe a person. So, my meetings were always full of fun and laughter. And we did talk about the stock market, of course, as everybody did with him. But even in that first meeting, as I wrote recently, I mean, when I walked into his room, he was staring intently at a trading screen, which is usually how you would find him if you walked into his office. And, I was 27 or 28, and I just blurted out nervously, but don't you tired looking at the same screen all the time? And without looking at me, he said, my friend, it's like having sex for 6 hours every day. Would you get bored of that? And I mean, I didn't know what to say. I mean, who says something like that to a young journalist who's walked into his office for the first time? And since that first meeting, that was really the tone of our engagements. I mean, we would have a drink together and he would just roll out these witticisms one after the other. So he was just an over-the-top kind of man. I mean, there was not a dull moment in your company with Rakesh. So I remember him fondly as a man with all his faults, with his complete temper tantrums and foul-mouthness and all of that, this uncouth behavior. But I think he's just one of his kind. He was not a boring stockbroker or investor. So that is how I'll remember him, as a human being and as a friend, rather than as a uber successful investor.
Absolutely, and that was just the magic and the personality that was Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. One moment, could be uncouth, and the next moment had the biggest heart and could spend hours talking to you about the most ad hoc things. But as an investor, Udayan, what's really set him apart from some of the other veterans in the market?
It was his patience, Aabha, and his courage. I think these two factors, make him stand out. It always amused me when people would try to mimic the stocks that he bought. I mean, Rakesh has bought this and therefore we should also own this stock. But if you look at his career, I mean, that's the one thing which stands out for him. I think it's not the stock selection, but it's just that he built on his winners and he kept on pyramiding them and holding them for very long periods of time. And that is the central lesson that one should take away in my book from Rakesh's career, that he was the very embodiment of that old adage in the market, that it's the time in the market which actually matters and what your exposure to the stock market is. Because Rakesh always said, my exposure to the stock market is 100%. It's not real estate. It's not bonds, it's not fixed deposit. I don't care about safety. All my money is in the Indian stock market. Till the last day, that was how he behaved. And he could hold stocks for 10, 20, 25 years at a time. So, when people copied him, I would always think, why don't they copy that essential trait which made him such a rich man instead of copying his portfolio? Because his portfolio had almost an equal measure of winners and losers. I mean, people talk about the Titans and Lupins of the world, which made him that enormous wealth, and the Crissils of the world. But they don't talk about the Mandhanas and JP Associates and Dewan Housings, these kind of absolute howlers he had in his portfolio. And if you look at the 25, 30 stocks that he owned, maybe 15 of them were duds and maybe 12 or 15 of them were winners. The winners were billion-dollar holdings. The duds became smaller and smaller over time. So it was not that he became rich because he was the best stock picker of his generation. he became wealthy, enormously wealthy, because he never sold his winners. He just kept on holding them for years and decades at a time, and then they became the multi-billion-dollar Titan holdings. And he told me once, and this is an interesting story, Aabha, he said, I have regretted every time I sold a good stock. The example that you would like to give is that once, when his mother asked him to buy a house for her, she sold some CRISIL shares and bought him the house. And then he said to his mother that if I'd held those shares instead of this house, my wealth would have been 50 times more than what I sold in terms of CRISIL shares. I mean, I think he sold CRISIL for 30 crore rupees for the house. It became 700 crores, those shares later. So he said, I regret every time I sold a good stock. So his patience and his courage in owning stocks is what really stood out for me rather than his stock picking abilities.
Always known for his witty anecdotes. Udayan, let me test your memory on this and see which are the ones that are most prominent in your mind.
You know, I can go on talking for hours about Rakesh's funny stories, but let me start with one saucy one for you. But this was around his 50th birthday when actually he had started hobnobbing with a lot of Bollywood heroines. So he'd come to, we met shortly after a meeting that he had with Priyanka Chopra. So when I met him, I said, Rakesh, I see that you've become quite the ladies' man. I know these days, Priyanka Chopra and all. I mean, is she your favorite Bollywood heroine now or what? He just, without batting an eyelid, looked at me and said, no, Udayan, I actually love Rekha. So, for a moment I was thrown, and I thought it was the Rekha, the Bollywood heroine, Amitabh Bachchan Rekha. But actually he was talking about his wife Rekha. And I burst out laughing because it was such a clever thing to say, that I love Rekha and not Priyanka Chopra. And he just looked at me and said, hey, young man, don't you go around trying those tricks with me. Don't teach your grandmother how to suck eggs, as they say in England. So he stumped me with that one, the Rekha versus Priyanka Chopra. Well, there are so many more, but the time when I asked him about why you trade so often and you're such a successful investor, why do you spend so much time trading? And again, he said, Udayan, investing is like sipping wine slowly and trading is like downing tequila shots. Both of us know which is good for health, the wine, but both of us also know which is more thrilling, the tequila, right? Which is the trading. So, I mean, he could reel off these things just one after the other. I mean, this is a great one. I mean, his one pet theme, as you will remember too, is that retail investors will finally come to Indian equities and they will invest their money there and they will become the driving force of the Indian stock market rather than FIIs. And now it is playing out in front of our eyes over the last couple of years, what he said. But back in the day, and he would say this 10 years ago, and sometimes I would rip him saying, Rakesh, what happened to retail? He said, they will come, Udayan, they will come. And then there's this Hindi line he's used to say that why they would come. And I remember this. He said, Jalta hua cigarette koi nahi chhod sakta. When the market gets hot, they will all come. Jalta hua cigarette koi nahi chhod sakta. So, he was one of a kind. I mean, these kind of stories, how can one forget?
Absolutely. And in fact, in one of my last conversations with him, he also said, there are different things that you have a taste for at different stages in your life. So also alluding to all those various passions that he accumulated over the years. But despite being, brash at times, so then he also had great respect for certain people. And I'm sure he shared that with you in some of those conversations you've had with him.
That's true, Aabha, because, I think at some level, despite all the foul-mouthed and over-the-top nature of his, he had very strong middle-class values. And I think he got that from his father. He admired the George Soroses of the world for their stock market prowess and all of that. But he had such deep respect for very core human values in people. I mean, his love for the Tata Group is well known. But sometimes he would also stun me by talking about people. I mean, for example, there was this friend of his, Amit Chandra. I think you know him as well. He's a stock market guy, used to work for Bain Consulting as well. And he said, Udayan, I've met very successful people, but none like Amit, because Amit from a very young age, a relatively young age, would automatically give us a very large percentage of what he earned every month to charitable purposes. So he was not like Azim Premji of that kind of wealth. he was a man who got a salary, a high salary, but from a very early age, a certain very high percentage of it would automatically be given for altruistic purposes. And that left such a mark on Rakesh, because he knew that it was not easy to give away uh, money constantly for a person who was not that wealthy as him. And then there was this instance of the Titan managing director for a very long time, Bhaskar Bhatt. You will remember him. But he loved Bhaskar Bhatt, not just because he made a lot of money from Titan. Because one Diwali, he told me that I'd sent Bhaskar, because Bhaskar had made such a lot of money through Titan for me. I sent him a Diwali card and I sent him an expensive watch or something very expensive as a gift. Bhaskar wrote back the next day thanking me for the wishes, but he returned that watch. He said, I cannot accept any article of value, but and he said that is what a Tata Group manager is for me, that he would not even accept a watch from, I mean, he's the managing director of a company. I was not trying to bribe him or anything like that, but he returned the gift and he kept my wishes. And that core thing about honesty is something which touched him a lot, and he admired and respected Bhaskar Bhatt a lot. And for the last 20 years, I could see that his heart was warming up towards people who actually do a lot for society. And one guy he repeatedly spoke to me about was Ramji Raghavan of Agastya Foundation. And Rakesh was one of the biggest contributors to Agastya Foundation, the social organization. And I mean, the reverence with which he spoke about Ramji's work told me that, his ambit of people who he really respected actually had nothing to do with wealth as such, but very core middle class human values of honesty, integrity, giving and caring for other people. And that's a side of Rakesh which was very heartwarming for me to notice.
Now, about his temper, because we can't not talk about that. I mean, I know, talking about being a novice, I've had the experience of having a few expletives in the phone slammed down on me. But you must have several examples of that, and give us an insight. And what caused it? Was it just when he was really busy, with the markets and during those hours, or were there other things that would also tip him off?
No. Rakesh was a very opinionated man, as you know. I mean, he had an opinion about everything, from Rahul Gandhi to Donald Trump. You could talk to him about anybody, and never a mild conversation. I mean, he would be spewing a betel nut out of his mouth and foaming, and that is how he was, as you well know. I mean, I was at the receiving end of it once. I mean, this is hearsay. I did not see it in front of my eyes, but apparently the market had collapsed one day, and he was watching me on television, and he was very angry and upset because of the way maybe the market was limit down that day. And I heard later, a lot of people told me this story, that he picked up a heavy paperweight and flung it at the plasma screen and shattered the television set where I was speaking. So that was directed at me. I mean, this is hearsay, but I think it was true, this story. So, I mean, this is how angry he could get at times. And there was this time when this whole Ratan Tata, and the Tata Group was his temple. I mean, he really worshipped that group. So there was this Cyrus Mistry versus Ratan Tata spat going on at that point in its full bloom. And I walked in to find Rakesh talking about Cyrus Mistry, and I cannot tell you the kind of adjectives that he was using. He was so angry. If Cyrus had walked into that room, then I fear to think what may have happened. He was so angry. There were other times. I mean, there was Donald Trump once, and I was saying, Rakesh, Donald Trump might win the election. And he was foaming in the mouth, and he said, there is no way any American man or woman who has a daughter who could ever go out and vote for that man. And he was proved to be wrong. But, there were several times I've seen him like so livid. But the good thing about him, Aabha, was that he would cool down as quickly as his temper had risen. So he would be very angry, and within minutes, he would have forgotten all about it. So, and maybe even said sorry or patted the object of his anger on the shoulder and moved on. So he blow hot, blow cold kind of guy.
Well, in the last few years, I did see a slightly mellowed version. Udayan, how do you feel he changed in the last few years? He celebrated his 60th birthday, of course, as we know, during COVID, with much warmth, surrounded by family. But as a person, as an investor, how do you feel he was different?
No, I think on the professional front, I think increasingly he wanted to build leave a legacy behind him, which is not that he made a lot of money by investing in Titan, but that he started an airline of his own called Akasa, which he left his imprint on, or the Star Health Insurance, which would be associated with him. And I would like to think that because he admired Radhakishan Damani so much, and seeing how much, it's not like a rivalry between two friends on how the market cap of D-Mart versus the wealth of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. Not at all. But I think he really admired what Radhakishan Damani created in D-Mart, and perhaps he wanted to take a leaf out of that book and leave his legacy behind with large successful organizations that he was not a merely passive investor in, but more than that. So part of that I could see. But I think more and more I got the sense from talking to him that he did realize, because of his excesses, you know how he drank, and this had to come to haunt him at some point in his life, because his health was just getting worse and worse, and he knew that time was running out for him. And so increasingly he would talk about what the real wealth of the last 10 years had been, was that how his daughters had turned out. I mean, the pleasure which family life gave him. He would talk about the house that he was building in South Mumbai, and I feel sad that I won't be able to have a drink with him in that house, because he did invite me on a couple of occasions very cordially to say, Udayan, I don't know, you should see, it's a marvel that I'm building, and we'll sit and have an 18-year-old malt then. Sadly, that occasion will never come. But, other things occupied him. And I think he lost a little bit of that spring in his stride because of this constant illnesses. So, as it happens towards the end of your life, I mean, you lose some of that fire in your belly. But I think he was at peace with himself, with the family and friends and the life that he had created around himself. So I think we should celebrate his life rather than feel bad that he went before his time.
Absolutely. Udayan, I think it's fair tribute, so to say, that the markets are topping 60,000 this week. Want to bring that up and just, do you feel this is a validation of the kind of growth you always imagined for the India story? Or, since you are sometimes a little cautious or skeptical about what's happening, do you still feel that's perhaps just a temporary rise that we're seeing right now?
No. Let's not talk about what happens next week and next month. Aabha, all these things that we keep talking about are ups and downs. Yes, we're going through a difficult phase in the market, and in the face of that, there has been a splendid rally. But Rakesh's optimism and belief about where the Indian market could head over a long period of time was of a different league altogether. He was a trader, so don't think that he did not understand ups and downs in the market. And initially in the first part of his career during the Harshad Mehta time, he actually made his money and his name by shorting stocks. So he was not any stranger to bearishness in the market at all. He was too astute for that. But I think his core conviction was that India had still not realized its full economic potential, and therefore its stock market potential. And on that, one can hardly argue with Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. And that's the thing about him, that his belief and his convictions were so rock solid that a stock could fall 80%, but that would still not shake his conviction. And India could go through 3 years of turmoil, but he would still believe that the greatest lay ahead.
Absolutely. And I think you're bang on in terms of remembering him for the larger than life figure that he was, the belief that he had, the conviction that he had. And, I think that he will be somebody who's remembered and whose memory will remain with anyone associated with the markets for a very, very long time. Udayan, thank you so much for joining us for that special conversation on the Big Bull.
Thank you.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.